Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast presented by DraftKings Pick 6. Brandon Kravitz here along with Nick Whalen on this NBA Cup Tuesday. We are going to hand things off to you for the bounce when we wrap up today's episode, so make sure to get those questions in the chat and we will respond accordingly. Nick, the quarterfinals tonight will give you some of our best bets that are on our minds and perhaps have already been placed. I've got about 4 or 5 out there right now. Anything been placed yet for you, Nick?
I'm excited. I mean, we have your team, the Orlando Magic, taking on my team, the Milwaukee Bucks, tonight in Milwaukee. The line is only 6.5 right now at FanDuel, which is interesting because, of course, one of those teams is without its 2 best players in Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero. And the number scares me a little bit, partially because, Milwaukee still can't be trusted. I know they've earned back some respect over the last few weeks, but they've beaten up on a lot of bad teams. I know they played Boston closely this past Friday, 3rd time this year that they've hung around with the Celtics, but haven't finished it. But the play I like the most here is the under 215.5. I think that's almost feels a little too obvious, but you have 2 of the biggest under teams in the NBA this season. You have an Orlando team down Franz and Pablo. Pablo. I don't know. I have some notes here, and I think my notes, the notes app autocorrects Paolo to Pablo. If we want to call him Pablo Banchero, we can. That sounds like a catcher who's hitting 8th for like the Padres or something. But we also have 2 teams. When you're worried about totals, you're always looking at the 3-point numbers, and Orlando and Milwaukee, they take a decent amount of threes. They're about league average. They're not way at the top of the league. Orlando's the worst 3-point shooting team in the NBA. They're shooting 31% as a team from beyond the arc. Orlando's 25th in pace. The Bucks are also below league average in pace. And, one thing, whether Banchero's been out, whether Wagner's been out, it doesn't seem to matter. Like, the Magic drag teams into the mud. Like, they tend to dictate style whoever they're playing against. And I think this ends up being, kind of like an NBA playoff game, right? Where it tends to be more grinded out. Teams are taking it a little more seriously on the defensive end. So, unless we get one of those Miami Heat, 19 threes through 3 quarters type of games, I feel pretty good about the under 215.5. So that's my biggest lean for tonight.
Yeah, any under is going to be roasted quickly if a team is just red hot from 3, and that's just something you have to understand when you get in bed with unders in the NBA. But the Magic are an under team in general. You mentioned it. They like to drag teams in the mud. That's the only chance I think they have in winning this game. If they're trying to keep pace with Milwaukee scoring-wise, I would look at it like this. If you think Orlando has a chance to cover the spread or win, you have to be on the under. Yeah. If this game can't hit over and the Magic win, I don't see how those 2 things happen. And then when you look at some of the games that Milwaukee, I'm much more plugged in with what the Magic are doing, and they play unders all the time. But when you look at Milwaukee's schedule, I like to look before I bet a total. What do these teams play like when they play similar types of competition? Houston and Miami are 2 teams that I'm looking at recently played by Milwaukee. 2 teams that play a similar defensive style or slower paced offensive style to the Orlando Magic. And you had that Houston game was a win, 101-100. That would have hit the under. Yeah. Miami, 106-103. That's exactly the kind of score I'm expecting tonight. Yeah. And as long as the Magic are in it, I think how you get to another way to get to the over is Milwaukee just plays their best version of basketball. They score into the 120s, 130s, and then they end up covering the spread by about 25. A few different ways that this could go, but I'm 100% with you. If you're betting this game, I think you got to take the under 215, 214.5, wherever you can get it.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, Orlando has been one of the bigger under teams in the NBA. They are 14-12, I should say, to the under. But a lot of those totals have been 204, 207, 206, right? It's like this is like a relatively high total for the Orlando Magic, and we're not even talking about a big total at 215.5. So I'd have to go through and see how many of those overs actually still went under this number because of how low a lot of these Magic games have been sitting. In terms of Mavs Thunder, I don't have a great read on this one. OKC 4.5 point home favorites tonight. 231 is the total. They continue to play well without Chet Holmgren. I think if you give me 4.5 with Dallas, I would probably take that. And then looking at the Wednesday slate, Warriors Rockets is a big time stay away for me. That's the Rockets is 2.5 point home favorites. 221 is our total there. Hawks Knicks is a really interesting one. Complete opposite. 237 is the total. Atlanta tends to play these high scoring games. The Knicks have been fantastic offensively. But the Knicks got dragged into the mud a little bit last night against Toronto, a Toronto team that lost Scottie Barnes, by the way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Only won that game by 5. And, we got a rest advantage here for Atlanta as well. I mean, the Knicks are basically the only team, that played yesterday. So, Atlanta's had a little bit more time to rest, a little bit more time to prepare as well.
Yeah, I would tend to lean the way of Atlanta tomorrow night. They've been playing some really good basketball as of late, and I think they're getting up for this tournament. They feel like that team this year that is using this tournament as a way to kind of wake up, and you're getting some good value in terms of the points. I love the rest advantage that you talk about, and I like the under in the late game tonight too. I'll just take a dueling unders on Tuesday night in the NBA Cup. Really fun way to bet the action tonight, but I figure at worst I'm going 1-1 tonight with these two, and then hopefully both hit. But OKC plays some really good defense, and talk about pace. Dallas really likes to slow things down.
Yep.
So I don't see how I don't see how these teams go over in that matchup. And yeah, I mean let's talk about that game from last night. You mentioned Scottie Barnes and the injury.
Yeah,
you had all 5 Knicks starters in double figures last night. 24 points, 15 rebounds from Karl-Anthony Towns. He hit the back-breaking 3 with about 6 seconds on the clock. And the Knicks have won 7 of their last 10. So let's start on the New York side of things. It feels like they're starting to click into place a little bit with this starting 5. Still unsure about the bench, but that starting unit is so good. It's going to take them. It's going to take them pretty much as far as they want to go this season.
Statistically, this has been the highest scoring starting 5 in NBA history. They once again combined for 90 plus last night. I think it was 91 total, and that's below their season average as far as what that starting 5 are giving them on a night-to-night basis. And keep in mind, Karl-Anthony Towns was essentially a game-time decision. Like he wasn't even confirmed to play until like 20 minutes before tip-off. So I ended up looking fine. 24, 15, 6, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He's been so good for them this year, but you wonder if he was even at 100%. I do think you're right about the bench. I mean, they need to make an addition at some point, and I think they will. It's hard to point to exactly who that is right now. I think they'll probably go, more bargain bin shopping, whether it's at the deadline or looking at some buyout guys. But it really feels like a team to me that has one dependable bench player, and that's Miles McBride. And I really like Miles McBride. I think he's a kind of a perfect energy spark plug, 3-point shooter, kind of do it all offensive player for them. But the only guys they routinely play off the bench, I mean, they run an 8-man rotation basically, and we see a little bit of Campaign, we see a little bit of Precious Achiuwa. That's kind of it. At some point, maybe they'll get some of their big man depth back, and we'll feel a little bit better about them. But you look at the other options, like the guys who were DNPs last night. It's Matt Ryan, not the NFL quarterback, Matt Ryan. He's a white guy who just shoots threes. He wears number 37. That's not a good sign. 37, very, very bad basketball number.
I think that would be the kind of player that the actual Matt Ryan would be as well. So it kind of fits.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, kind of. I think they're looking for the next Steve Novak. Maybe that could be him. But it's Matt Ryan, Jacob Toppin, Jericho Sims, Ariel Hook-Porty, Tyler Kolek, and Pakame Dadier. Like that's your bench right now if you're the Knicks. There's a reason a lot of these guys aren't playing. I think they'll be that team that looks at some of the teams near the bottom of the standings and says, all right, can we pluck away one of your veteran bench pieces and add to this team? Because as great as the starting 5 is, you got to have some more depth. Like at some point, injuries are going to hit this team like they've hit just about everybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, we're already seeing it. Look, Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby played 40 minutes last night. This is what Tom Thibodeau does, and he gets great regular seasons out of his teams. They always peter out in the playoffs. And when you build a starting 5 like this, you're not doing it so that you can have the 2 seed. You're doing it so that you can go deep in the playoffs. And the only way to manage that is to have a bench that you can trust. I think this is why a lot of people liked Miles McBride for 6th man of the year coming into the season, because he figured he'd get all of this run. But He hasn't really taken off in that way. And so they have those question marks. Now, the Raptors did seem to avoid a scare last night. Scottie Barnes sustained a sprained right ankle in the third quarter last night, but x-rays came back negative. He's going to be reevaluated later today. So how do we handle this moving forward? Any real concern for you as far as Barnes goes with another injury already on the season?
Yes, as somebody who is heavily invested in Scottie Barnes, this is a little concerning. I was doing the Sirius XM show last night and got a text from our guy Alex Barutha, and he's like, "Hey, I don't know if you're watching, but just want to let you know Scottie Barnes is currently down on the floor and can't put any weight on his foot." I'm like, appreciate the heads up, man. Thank you. I was watching, in fact, and I was able to witness that. I think the update that we've received so far feels like best case, right? I mean, you're thinking, I don't know, did he fracture his foot? Did he fracture his ankle? Like the way he hopped off, it certainly didn't look good, but x-rays came back clean. They're saying they're going to reevaluate him today. As far as the NBA schedule goes, it's like, I guess this was kind of a good time for this to happen. It's not basically everybody's playing like 2 games this week. So, the worst case scenario is, you got a guy on a 4-game week in a weekly lineup league, and this happens on a Monday. So you basically get like a half game out of Scottie Barnes, and then he misses the rest of the week and you just take a 0. So hopefully this ends up being something that he could shake off and then potentially be back, as early as next week. I wouldn't necessarily count on that. Could be something where he does end up missing a little bit more time, but there's also a light schedule in the NBA next week too, because of the in-season tournament. So as far as the timing of this injury, I guess it happened at a good time, but it could be the second time now that Scottie Barnes ends up missing multiple games. Obviously had the orbital fracture earlier in the season. And I mean, he's been so good since coming back. Basically been averaging close to a triple double. Like he's been at like 24 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists, giving you over a steal, over a block per game. So a big loss for however much time he misses. But with him out for a lot of the second half, we saw Jakob Poeltl put up another big rebounding game. We saw RJ Barrett put up another 30-point game. Jacoby Walter out of nowhere puts up 19 off the bench. So I was still impressed, with this Toronto team hanging around against the New York Knicks. But you do wonder if this was just one of those classic, looking ahead to the NBA Cup spots for the Knicks.
How much have you guys talked about this on the other pods that you do as far as and I don't think this is an issue yet, but the shutdown potential for a guy like Scottie Barnes. They're the second worst team in the Eastern Conference right now. All these bad teams are in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. And it's not like the Raptors are going anywhere. They don't feel like the kind of organization that would do this, but I guess I shouldn't put it past anybody. Has that been a big talking point that Scottie Barnes could be one of those guys?
Yeah, maybe. It totally depends on the trajectory, for the rest of the season. And I think Toronto's pretty realistic about where they stand right now. They've always been, I think one of the smarter organizations in the NBA. And, I think realistically, are they going to be a playoff team? I don't think so. Maybe that'll depend on how much time Scottie Barnes misses. Maybe that'll depend, on when, if ever, they get Emmanuel quickly back. But it's not something we've discussed, a ton so far.
RJ Barrett, you mentioned him with another big night, dropped 30. That was the 7th time this year that RJ Barrett has had 30 points or more. He is 5th on the list of most improved player. My guy Franz, by the way, glad I cashed out on that ticket. He is no longer the favorite. I don't even think he's going to be eligible for this award. How a week changes everything.
Yeah.
But is RJ Barrett a value for most improved player as the 5th shortest odds on the list?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's 18-1 right now at DraftKings, which makes him the 6th shortest odds. And you're right, about Franz, which, good thing he cashed out. He's not even listed right now on DraftKings. So I think
2
there is
weeks,
a belief that he's
2 to 3 weeks, or actually, he's going to be reevaluated in 4. So if you can't play for a month with today's rules, you're done. You're done as far as all NBA or any awards.
He has the same injury as Banchero, right? It's the oblique injury, and not everybody heals the same, but I think you could use Paolo Banchero as a guide, and he's missed enough time that he's not going to be eligible either. So yeah, he's going to be knocked out of the mix for better or for worse. I mean, Barrett at 18-1. There's Mobley at 14-1. Dyson Daniels 10-1. I think Jalen Johnson 6-1 is the guy that I would really take a look at, because I think he's made an even bigger leap from last year. And maybe the argument against him is he was good enough last season that it doesn't feel like he's made that big of a leap. But I think you could say the same thing about Jalen Williams, who's the odds-on favorite right now at plus 150. Like, his numbers, he's having a great year, but it's not like he's up 10 points per game compared to last year. Whereas I feel like Jalen Johnson, especially the last couple of weeks, like if you watch the Hawks, like he looks and feels like their best player. Trae Young is still kind of running everything, but he's deferred a lot of that scoring, especially to Jalen Johnson. He's been great on the defensive end as well. I think once you get beyond RJ Barrett, you could pretty easily poke holes in most of the cases for the other guys. Like Norman Powell, 22-1, having a great year, but guys at his age don't really win this award. It's like, did he really make this big leap, or is he just playing more minutes and there's more opportunity? I think that's pretty clearly the case. Cade Cunningham, 25-1, really good player, but again, has been a good player. Has just always either been injured or been on, a bad team. So we kind of ignore him. And then, once you get into that, you're in long shot territory. So yeah, RJ Barrett 18-1, I think makes some sense, because, oftentimes these awards, for better or for worse, come down to just, all right, who made, who has the best counting stats? It's not necessarily team impact. And when you're talking about a guy, in Barrett, who is up 4 points per game, he's up an assist and a half per game, he's up in rebounds. The efficiency is still not been all that great, which is always going to be the case with RJ Barrett. But the big concern with him is when Emmanuel Quickley is back, again, whenever that is, how much of a drop off do we see? Because you're adding another high usage guard into the mix. Presumably Barnes will be back at that time as well. And it's hard to imagine, RJ Barrett giving you a 30-point game every week with all three of those guys healthy.
It does feel like team success for an award like this is maybe third on the list. Counting stats would be one.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really important who makes the All-Star team. Which of these guys gets into the All-Star game, I think, is going to be the thing that pushes them over the top. I don't think you leave out Jalen Williams, which is why he's the odds-on favorite.
Right.
Jalen Johnson is going to be a bubble guy. I think he'll be right there. He probably should be an all-star, but I was starting to count the list, the list of names. And you have like 9 locks in the East, and then there's like 8 guys that you would debate for the next 3 spots. So it's hard to come up with that final few.
Yeah. No,
but Johnson's
right
on that list.
I mean, it's like the Cavs. The Cavs get at least 2. The Celtics get at least 2.
Right.
I think the Knicks probably get 2. I guess right now it'd be Towns and Brunson.
You're at 6. LaMelo Ball's in there. You could probably put 2 in for the Bucks.
Yep. I think Dame and Giannis are in for sure. So yeah, I mean, that's 9 right there. And then see, I mean, you got essentially 3 more spots. We'll see on Haliburton. There's still enough name value and cachet that he could get in. I don't know if the Bulls get anybody, although Nikola Vucevic has been very much deserving so far. But I think Jalen Johnson probably finds his way in. Honestly, the Sixers might be the swing team here. It's like, does Embiid find his way in? Does Paul George find his way in a popularity contest? Tyrese Maxey probably should be in. But no, I mean, really, it'll come down to that. And then it could even be Trae Young versus Jalen Johnson, which is kind of crazy. And,
right.
Again, in terms of name value, Trae Young's probably going to win that debate.
Trae Young will have more votes, but at that point, when you have the split of the coaches are getting involved now, I think coaches would favor what Jalen Johnson has brought to the table. And then what do those Magic guys look like? I think Franz is probably out of the equation, just given when the injury timeline started for him. But Paolo will be back by the time voting starts, and I think he could end up working himself back into the mix and has that star quality about him that would curry some favor.
I mean, as a player, he's absolutely deserving. It totally depends when he's back. I mean, he's played 5 games, so it's like if he's not back, because we have no update. I don't know if you know anything.
But if he's back let's just say it's at Christmas, and then I think voting starts like 15 days after that.
Right. So if he's back in early January, maybe he could play enough games. There's not a whole lot of precedent for guys, playing like 12 games by the time voting closes and still getting in. So unfortunately, with the timing of the injuries, I think both of those guys, I think there's a pretty good chance they're knocked out.
If Embiid gets in and Paolo doesn't, I will riot. Okay, just know that I will riot. Yes. Jimmy Butler is on the trade block, apparently. Shams with the report of the week saying that the Heat are listening to offers for the 14-year vet. And it makes sense. The Heat feel like they're going nowhere fast. They clearly peaked with getting to the finals a couple of years ago. And he's 35 years old. I don't think he's a difference maker for this team anymore as far as really pushing to the finals. And he's good enough to help somebody else. So it makes sense. It's a big personality too. So I don't think any team could look at just, hey, we'll just plop Jimmy Butler in there. But what do you think of the report? Is this have legs to you?
Well, I mean, it's coming from Shams Charania, so it absolutely has legs. We had heard some Butler Miami rumblings last year. Pat Riley, kind of publicly called out Jimmy Butler about as publicly as something like that happens. And so it's not shocking here. I think there's been some smoke around the situation for a while. Worth noting that Shams, in his piece, noted that Butler is open to playing primarily for the Mavericks, the Rockets, or the Warriors. Obviously, Butler is a Texas guy, so some ties to those areas, and wants to play for a title contender, which is also interesting because I think the Heat fancy themselves as a title contender, right? It's not like this team was going into a rebuild this year and looking to shed any pieces. So, more than anything, maybe it just speaks to Butler's view on the situation in Miami, and maybe they share that view of, okay, we understand that we're a good team. We'll make the playoffs, but do we really have championship upside? Maybe not. And kind of starting to look ahead to what the next phase of the Miami Heat franchise looks like. Probably building this team around Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero instead of Jimmy Butler being the centerpiece. So, yeah, I'm not really surprised at all that these reports are out there. I think he would be a really interesting fit in Houston specifically. I wouldn't love this necessarily for Golden State. I'm with you. I love, Jimmy Butler's an awesome NBA personality. He's still a good player. He's not a, oh my God, the Warriors got Jimmy Butler, they're the team to beat. I mean, it helps. It certainly makes them better. The West is really stacked up right now, and maybe that gives them an edge and kind of pushes them ahead of some of those teams that are all in that same zone. But I think Houston would be the one where, like, on paper, it feels like the best fit in terms of their style, in terms of the pieces that would be around him.
Yeah, I just don't know. But how you make the money work in the NBA is always such a big part of the equation. Is this even possible? You could throw those teams out there, but Houston has some cheaper pieces, and the guys that do get paid a lot are part of the reason that they're good. Do you want to move off of that for Jimmy Butler? I would have to break that down more as far as salary goes, but Houston doesn't really feel like they make as much sense. With Dallas, they could say, hey, Jimmy Butler would help us win a championship a whole lot more than Klay Thompson would. And you could very quickly move off of dollars like that and pair him with, I've seen PJ Washington thrown out there, and then bring in Jimmy that way. I think Golden State has some obvious pieces, but are you moving off of Draymond Green in order to get? So it's always tough. The NBA fancies itself as a league that is built on the part of the popularity is the transactional nature of this league, but they also make it very hard for these transactions to actually take place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. It's much more difficult to execute a trade like this than it would have been under the previous CBA, and that's certainly something they'll have to consider. I mean, Golden State would not trade Draymond. They obviously wouldn't trade Curry. It would have to be the some combination of Kuminga. Maybe you have to throw the Wiggins deal in there. Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski. Like they have enough relatively appealing players. I think you could build a package. You could throw in some picks. Like I think Houston's probably the team that's best prepared to put really appealing pieces on the table, right? You have Tari Eason, you have Amen Thompson. I think there's still some interest in Cam Whitmore, and you got Reed Shepherd, who's not really playing for this team. Jabari Smith, could be somebody that the Heat would view as a reclamation project. So I think Houston is best positioned, should they have enough interest even in Jimmy Butler, to hit the gas on something like this.
It feels like an Ime Udoka guy. I could see it working. So I have a couple of buy or sells I want to throw Nick's way. Yeah. We've got your questions lighting us up on the comment section. But first, a quick word from Nick and our friends at DraftKings Pick 6.
with DraftKings Pick 6 this NBA season? Think your team will score more than 100 points tonight? How about your favorite point guard making more than 4 3-pointers? Check out DraftKings Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy basketball and win cash with DraftKings. Here's how it works. All you got to do is pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. So for hoops, we're talking points, assists, rebounds, etc. Lock in those picks, compete against opponents for your shot at huge cash prizes. Go download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use our code RotoPick, ROTOPICK. That's code RotoPick for new Pick 6 customers. Play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
As always, if you're looking for trade targets, guys to pick up off the waiver wire for your fantasy hoops league, RotoWire.com, the best place to find those. And I plucked a few names off of the website this morning that I wanted to throw the way of Nick Whalen here. So these are guys that would either be trade candidates or guys that you could pluck off of the waiver wire, depending on the deep nature of or shallow nature of your league. Yves Missi of the New Orleans Pelicans. Are you in or out on Yves? 9 points, 8 rebounds per game across 15 starts. Is this something you're buying into?
It is. Unfortunately, I dropped Missi in a couple of leagues a few weeks ago when he went through a rough stretch and missed a game, was not in the starting lineup the next night, and I just needed some other categories and parted ways with him. Was able to pick up Nick Richards, who does a lot of the same things, so didn't take a massive hit there. But I would certainly like to have Yves Missi on my rosters in deep leagues. And since missing that game just before Thanksgiving, he's come back. He's played 8 games. He's given you 14, 11, 1.6 blocks per game in that span. And the blocks had actually been pretty spotty through most of November. He came out and had multiple blocks in the first 4 games of his NBA career, and then went through a stretch where he wasn't really blocking shots. The rebounds, the minutes have been on and off. But he's been, a much more consistent piece in that rotation. And really since DeJounte Murray and CJ McCollum came back, we've seen a little bit higher volume scoring as well. And, Yves Missi is not a scorer. If you watch him, everything is right around the rim, but he actually has reasonable guards setting him up for easy looks. And, Murray himself has not played that well, but he's still generating offense for someone like Missi. So I think, at least until Zion is back, because they might try to play Zion at center. They've been talking about playing Herb Jones at center. I don't know. But they have to play Missi for now because they don't really have any other options. And honestly, I don't trust Zion to come back anytime soon. I don't trust him to stay healthy when he's back. So yeah, I'm in on Missi.
Do you think that's the biggest piece to the Missi puzzle, is that Zion hasn't been healthy? Because it felt like if you go back to the beginning of the season, there's no real clear big for New Orleans, and I think Yves Missi was somewhat on our radar, and he looked pretty good in the preseason. But should we have been more in on him, or is this simply because Zion hasn't been active enough?
Yeah, I mean, he started starting after Zion got hurt, so I think that's definitely worth noting. He didn't start a game until Zion went down. As far as should you have been targeting him coming into the year, I don't know. You didn't have to take him in like a 10 or a 12 team league. In the 14 and the 16 team leagues that I play in, I was taking him, but it was, last pick, $1 at the end of an auction type of stuff. I think, unless you're really clued in on the draft, unless you're really clued in on, projected depth charts, it's not like everybody was clamoring for Yves Missi. It was just, I'm not even going to sit here and claim that I watched, every Yves Missi game at Baylor. It was just a very clear, the Pelicans don't have any centers. This guy is going to have to play. We'll see if he's good. And, it turns out that most NBA players, even rookies, if you give them enough minutes, they're going to be productive. So yeah, it was just one of those things where coming into the year, starting in like August, you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for that alert to come through that the Pelicans had brought in, I don't know, like Mo Bamba or Bismack Biyombo or somebody like that. And they just never did. They never did. I mean, it's Yves Missi and Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who is not good. Those are your 2 options at center. So I think if and when Zion is back at some point, we're looking at a lower ceiling night to night. But again, do you really trust Zion to stay healthy? I don't.
I'll give it two more names, and then we'll get to your questions and wrap today's episode. Trey Murphy, if you hung on to him, good for you. 19 points per game, nearly 5 boards and 2 steals per game in his last 6 played. So that's another piece for New Orleans. But I wanted to ask you about Christian Braun, shooting 58% from the floor, 15.6 points per game, and he gets you steals.
Yep.
Is this a guy that you're in or out on?
Oh, definitely in on Christian Braun. I don't really understand how he's good. Like, he's not like he's a really good athlete, in terms of like vertical leap and things like that, but he's not like a smooth player to me. I even thought that at Kansas coming out, but he's been a really good fit. We talked a lot about, for the Nuggets to have success this season, and we could debate whether they actually have. They're going to need multiple young guys to step up, and Braun was probably at the top of that list. I mean, he's now played 22 games. He scored in double figures in every single game so far this year, which for a role guy who often doesn't take that many shots is pretty impressive. I mean, he's been getting to the free throw line at a really good rate, 3.5 free throw attempts per game. Really, really good, super aggressive player as far as getting to the rim goes. Obviously, he's finishing at the rim at a really high rate. That's why he's shooting 57% from the field, but he's also shooting 43% from 3. Now, the issue with that is he's not a high volume 3-point shooter. He only takes like 2.5 per game. So, the percentages are really nice, but he's only giving you 1.1 made threes. But really, I mean, you're in it for the consistent points, the consistent minutes. He rebounds well for his size and for his position. And like you said, the steals. I mean, 1.2 steals per game. He's also a guard who blocks shots at a pretty decent rate, 0.7 blocks per game on the year. So definitely in on Christian Braun. If he's out there, you should pick him up.
Jalen Suggs, now the star of the show for the Orlando Magic with Franz and Paolo on the shelf. And at least for the next couple of weeks, it is going to be all on him. But will it hold? Is this a guy, he's not out there on the waiver wire or anything, but is he somebody that you would look to trade now with this heightened value that he has? Or are you still worried about turnovers and too many missed shots for a guy that can be spotty?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a 9-cat league, you got to think about the turnovers, but it's not extreme. Like, he's under 3 turnovers per game. You'd like to think that once Banchero's back, he can hand off some of that playmaking responsibility. I wouldn't say you have to sell Jalen Suggs, because I don't necessarily think what he's doing is totally unsustainable. He started the season shooting it super hot from 3, went through a cold stretch. Now he's been a little bit better. I think on balance, 16 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 steals. Like, that's a pretty realistic stat line for Jalen Suggs. The one thing I would say, though, is like, can he continue to be a 92% free throw shooter? This is a guy who's never been a good free throw shooter. He was a bad free throw shooter in college. He's been in the mid to low 70s for his first 3 years in the NBA. So there could be some regression coming there. I think the case, if you would say you could sell high on Suggs, would be that once Banchero is back, there's probably going to be a downturn. So I would maybe let him bank a couple more, 25-5 nights, and then see if you can get a dramatically better player for him. Obviously, you should do it, but I wouldn't say he's a must sell, because even once Banchero's back, they're going to be without Franz for another month plus, So I think this runway, for better or for worse, with the injuries, is going to continue.
Let's get to your questions. It's time for the bounce. Your questions in rapid fire form. We'll start with Guilford trying to unload Lauri Markkanen and Randall for Miles Turner in a 12-team head-to-head, or straight up Markkanen for Walker Kessler, looking for those blocks. What do you say? How do we handle Markkanen?
Interesting. I am always a fan of trying to offload Lauri Markkanen, who is just so frustrating. So frustrating. I traded him, I think, 2 weeks into the season. I bought him for a discount in an auction league and immediately regretted it, and was reminded that this guy, like, the season-long numbers end up looking okay, but like, last I checked, he was like 4th on his own team in usage rate. That's not good when you're pretty clearly the best player. The field goal percentage is down. 3-point shooting is down from last year. The rebounding is way down. So first of all, I think you're totally right to try to get off of him. Packaging him with Randall, it's like Randall's a similarly frustrating player, but he's a hell of a lot more consistent. Like, you're going to get the counting stats just about every night. The Timberwolves only really have 2 offensive options right now, and it's him and Anthony Edwards. So you'd be giving up 27 and 4 on a nightly basis. Randall's giving you almost 2 threes per game. He's shooting it well from the field. I I don't necessarily mind the Kessler package here. I know it feels like you're taking a pretty big loss based on ADP, based on reputation here, but I mean, in a category league, the blocks are so valuable. I mean, Walker Kessler's given you almost 3.5 blocks per game over his last 8. He's playing over 32 minutes in that span. That was the big thing last year. It's like, 1, he wasn't starting, and 2, he was playing like 21 minutes a game off the bench. And it's not just blocks, right? I mean, he's giving you high level rebounding as well. If you could trade him straight up for Kessler, honestly, I think I would just do that.
Johnny says Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Williams for Victor Wembanyama and Devin Vassell.
Oh man, I know it's really appealing to get your hands on Wembanyama. It, excuse me, this one would almost depend on like where you are in the standings. Are you low and you just feel like you need to make a splash? In that case, maybe you go for it. But I mean, Cat's been incredible. Jalen Williams has been a first round value. So I don't know that I would do this. I don't know that I would. I think you're giving up a little too much here. I mean,
yeah.
Obviously Wembanyama is the best player in the deal, but he's not like lapping the field in terms of fantasy points like someone like Jokic is. You look at just total fantasy points per game. Jokic is on another level from guys.
So you would make that deal for Jokic if that was Jokic and Vassell. You would do that.
I would be a lot more interested in it. Yeah. I think I probably would. But no, I would hold Cat and Jalen Williams if I were you. I mean, we talked at the top of the show about this Knicks team being so starting 5 reliant. Karl Anthony Towns has been a really good player throughout his career. He's been a first round fantasy player multiple times. It's not shocking that he's putting up the numbers that he is. And, Jalen Williams has been this guy for a couple of years as well. So I would hold the Cat and J Will side.
Cano Demirs asks the question. He wants us to rank the rest of season head-to-head points league. Shadon Sharpe, Malik Beasley, Christian Braun, and Jonathan Kuminga.
Man, this is interesting in a points league because pretty much anything you're getting from Malik Beasley is tethered to the 3-pointers, and obviously those result in points as well. But he's not. He doesn't really give you assists. He doesn't really give you too much defensively. He doesn't really, give you too many rebounds. So it kind of just becomes, points in that format. So I think that drops him down a little bit. Shadon Sharpe, you could say is somewhat of a similar player. He takes a ton of threes. A lot of it is points based with him as well. Gives you a little bit more, in terms of counting stats, but not a whole lot. Oh man. I think I would go, man, I'm trying to pull up the season-long fantasy stats numbers so I can give you a good read here. I think I might go Braun, Sharpe, Kuminga, Beasley. And, Kuminga is really, really tough to trust night to night, but he's been in the midst of a really nice run. And, the last 6 games, giving you 19, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.2 steals. Yeah, I think that I'll stick with that order.
Braun, Sharpe, Kuminga, Beasley, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, let's wrap with this one. Ant wants to, he's first of all, proper shout out. Love the show. We love you too. Cam Johnson and Darius Garland for Tyrese Haliburton. Your thoughts? It's a category league.
Interesting. So buying kind of low on Tyrese Haliburton. Haliburton, of course, coming off of yet another single-digit scoring performance. Darius Garland's been really good, obviously, so far this season. This is another one where I would say it depends on where you are in the standings. Like if you need to make something happen, I don't have a problem with this deal because the track record suggests that Haliburton just can't be worse than he's been so far, and he's been a first-round value the last couple of years. This is a pretty fair deal. Cam Johnson's been really good this season as well. I do worry about the Nets in general as like a team that can we trust them? I think you'll be taking a short-term loss here because Cam Johnson's been so good, because he's hitting so many threes. He's basically their like number 2, number 1 option right now, without Cam Thomas out there. This is so much tougher than it should be. The Garland for Haliburton part of it, I think is fine. If you could do a slight downgrade on Cam Johnson, as your second piece, I would look into that. But I don't hate this deal. It depends on your belief in Haliburton. If you think he turns it around, then I think this is going to be a profitable trade for you.
And this is why it's important to think these things through. And we appreciate you guys hitting us up in the comment section. We are back at it next Tuesday, this pairing on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. But we got 4 episodes per week that you can dig into. I'm Brandon Kravitz. He's Nick Whalen. This episode has been presented by DraftKings Pick 6. Good luck with all of your bets and your fantasy lineups tonight, and we will chat soon. Goodbye.